Welcome, everybody. Good morning or good afternoon if you're all the way on the East Coast or maybe even somewhere else in the world. My name's Charlie Taibi. I am the CEO of Year On. Super excited to have everybody here today for what everyone should know about gap years and taking a year on. I am joined by Alex Ellison. She is an independent consultant who supports students in navigating the college planning process and has been a longtime friend of Year On. A little plug here. Alex actually has a book coming out this spring called Go Your Own Way. It highlights 7 different types of students and how they pursue college in their own unique ways. So we'll definitely be sending out an email when that is closer to being released. But Alex is going to talk a little bit about that today, and I think that it's really important to be highlighting those different types of students because obviously we're seeing students taking very different paths after they graduate high school now. We're also joined by Allison Sawyer. She is a Year On alumna who explored Bali and San Francisco and is now at the University of Missouri. Thank you for coming all the way. Allison is currently sitting in our San Francisco office. Is it raining still in San Francisco?
It's not right now.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you brought the nice weather because it has been raining for the past 2.5 weeks. So hopefully that is, we can say goodbye to the rain. So the way today's going to work, everybody, for the next 45 minutes or so, we're just going to kind of go over what where we see this kind of space going and talk about different students and how they're really starting to explore the space. I'll share a little bit about Year On, and then I'll have Allison really talk about her Year On experience so you can really get a feel for what it would be like to take a gap year. I want everybody, if you have questions during this, you'll see that there's a little place for the Q&A. We actually have one of our staff members, Veronica, who is working behind the scenes. She is kind of getting all those questions together, and she'll either ping us to, say, hey guys, let's answer these questions right now, or we'll leave it to the end and then we'll kind of get to all of those. But hopefully we have a lot of information here. We want to make sure that we're answering what you really want to know. So please make sure to kind of put that in that chat box for us. All right, I'm going to jump in here. Just a little, just the welcome. And I guess how this whole thing came to be, some of you might be familiar with an association called the Gap Year Association. It is kind of the umbrella organization that is really trying to get gap years on the map in higher ed. It was started several years ago. It used to be called the American Gap Association. And they started this thing last year, and it was called Gap Year Decision Day. It was kind of modeled off of Michelle Obama's College Decision Day. And we were trying to really promote and get people excited about taking a gap year. It was definitely, we have students who they're still, off the beaten path a little bit. It's not the norm. And we wanted to really celebrate that. And we want people to know that if you are deciding to take a gap year, that it also should be a celebration, very similar to, when you get that college acceptance or you put that deposit down for the next 4 years of your life. And so we did that and we tried it out and we thought, hey, this was really cool. And we got some people to really get on board with it. But what we realized was a lot of people, and maybe some of you included, were a little kind of in this space of, but what are gap years? And what do we, what kind of gap year should I take? Is a gap year, some people think gap year is just a time that I'm going to travel the world and during my off time watch Netflix. Some people think that gap years are just service learning. Some people think that, oh, I'm gonna, be skiing for a while. And it can be all of those things. It can be a combination of those things. It has a really broad term. But we thought instead at the Gap Year Association to make a whole month of this. And for the month of February, students are in this space where most of them have applied to college already. And now how do they think about what it is they want to do? And how can they explore this very different option that is starting to really come on the scene? And the reason here, we're seeing that it's right now 50% of high school students want to delay college. This is a report that came out last year. Obviously, we're seeing the rise in the cost of college, and a lot of students are starting to wonder whether or not that is the best next step for them. And for some, it absolutely is, and for some, it absolutely is not. So we want to start to really get gap years in front of people so they can understand that there is an option to help people bridge kind of the hyper-structured high school environment to the not-so-structured, quote, life after high school, whether that's college, whether that's getting a job, and how can we help people with those skills? Right now, we have 35% of students who are thinking about taking a gap year after high school. And that number has really risen over the past couple of years. And we're just seeing it kind of increasing. We have a lot of universities, and Harvard is usually the one that's cited that has said for a very long time, if students would like to defer, feel free to defer. But we're seeing more and more colleges get on board and say, we want students to be able to take a gap year if they want to, and we're going to hold their spot here. And I think that that's a real part of why we're seeing more and more students decide to kind of take this jump. Again, people are burnt out, or people aren't quite sure what it is they want to major in, but they do want to go to college, but they just need some kind of time and some kind of support to be able to figure a lot of that out. And when you look at some of the students that are already in school, many of them are saying that they wish they would have taken some time beforehand to emotionally prepare. There are many students who feel that they are not emotionally or socially prepared for college. All of you as counselors and parents, you can probably identify those students. And of course, there are some students who feel that they are prepared and do really well, but many students are not. And we are also recognizing that that is something that we need to tackle before students go into school, because very unfortunately, what we're having is students go into college, and right now our national average for freshman retention rate is around 70%. So, we've got 3.6 million students graduating high school every single year. About 2.5 million of them are going into college. And of that 2.5 million, 30% are dropping out. And even if students are doing really well, only 60% of them are getting through in that 4 years. And that's kind of scary for us. And, again, we kind of take this position in the gap year space of how can we make sure that students are preparing themselves, that they are really understanding who they are as people, so they can take that next step with some confidence. So as I said, this 30% and the 60% is just something that we really think is important for us to start tackling. I'm going to hand it over to Alex now. She's going to kind of go through really, what is a gap year and some of these different students and the student stories that we really need to focus on over the course of the next couple of years to really kind of hone in on what kind of student should really be thinking about taking a gap year and how is this benefiting certain types of people.
Yeah, thanks so much, Charlie. So when I started doing independent counseling, I was noticing this huge sense of anxiety, and actually that started to increase. So at first, when it was 6 years ago when I was doing this wasn't as obvious, but this has sort of been an increasing trend, this level of anxiety. And when you really sort of boil it down, when you get to really understand where this anxiety and fear is coming from after you get to know a student well, you find that it has to do with a lack of context, like just a lack of awareness. We're asking them these huge questions. Where do you want to go to college? What do you want to major in? What do you want to do for a job? Where do you see yourself living? And they're answering these questions based on maybe like popular media and television and Netflix movies and things like this, and what their neighbors and their parents are saying, but they really have no context. And so, when I did my research in Switzerland, the job shadowing thing is huge, right? This idea of shadowing a company before you make a decision about what you want to study and eventually what career you want to go into. I was part of creating a job shadowing program back in Nevada to give this context and exposure. This kind of thing is really important, but for the majority of students, they don't have that opportunity in high school. And we're not giving them enough time outside of the classroom to get that exposure either. And so we're assuming that context will come in college, but that's even a tall order, right? And so this idea of a gap year, I see it first and foremost as an opportunity to get some context. And with that context comes sort of this calming of fears and anxieties. And so that's how I phrase it and sort of view it in my practice. What I started to do with my students to sort of normalize a gap year is, and many counselors who are on this call might use this program called College Planner Pro. And when you enter a new student into College Planner Pro, they ask you their birthday and their personal data and when they're graduating, but then it's a separate question, when are they starting college? So what I've started to do, without just sort of really making a big deal out of it, I'll say, okay, what year are you graduating? Great, okay, 2020. And when do you plan on starting college? Because it just very simply starts to shift this narrative that you have to start college the fall after you graduate from high school. So that's what I started to do, sort of just to very subtly change the narrative. So let's head over to Okay, so what is a gap year and what is a gap year not? Yeah, a lot of parents and students will actually say to me, Alex, I really don't want to take a gap year because I'm scared that I won't go back to college. I literally had a student just this last week say this. I'm scared of taking a gap year because I think I won't go back. Well, we already know the vast majority, over 90%, do go back to college. But that aside, you know, a gap year really is first and foremost this time to focus on personal development. Yes, there are a lot of programs out there that will award college credit and give you the work experience, and all of that's really important. But we're finding that, and we'll show this in a few additional slides, that the benefits are first and foremost personal, and so that's huge. A gap year is definitely not a year off. In most cases, the gap year will be more intentional and more sort of fast-paced and busy than a traditional school year, but it'll be directed by the student. So it'll feel personal. It'll feel intentional. So we can go to the next slide here. So why a gap year? You know, we'll talk a little bit about what kinds of students go on a gap year. But what I'm finding is you kind of have these two main clusters of students. And we could even tease that out a little bit more. But on one hand, we've got these really high achievers. And on the other hand, we have these students who are maybe sort of really just sick of traditional schooling and sort of jaded by their high school experience. And that tends to be the two main groups that I see. And when I talk about gap year programs, the conversation is a little bit different. For the high achievers, it's often a time to recoup. Of these high achievers are prone to burnout. Oftentimes, if we don't acknowledge that soon enough, they're the ones who are coming out of college after their first semester for mental health reasons, and they need a break. And hopefully we can work with those students before it gets to that point, and a gap year can be really beneficial for those kids. For the students who are sort of jaded by traditional schooling, they really desperately need an opportunity to see what learning can look like in a more self-directed way and in a more enjoyable way. Because unfortunately, they've equated schooling with, or learning with traditional schooling, and that's not the case. We need to help them fall in love again with informal learning, and that can be a benefit of a gap year. We'll talk about maturity in a minute as well. So let's go to the next slide. So who is a gap year for? I mentioned these two main buckets, but we can even tease this out a little bit more. And this next slide has I love this image here. So we have 5 main sort of student types who could all benefit from a gap year: the meaning seeker, the worker, the floater, the struggler, and the pragmatist. Now, what I noticed in my work with students is I was going to kind of share with you a couple of stories. What I've seen is, one, we've got an athlete. So my athlete, you know, you've probably heard of a PG year. So that's pretty common. You know, this is nothing new for student athletes, especially, to do a gap year program. But I actually had a student a while ago who, this was probably 3 years ago, she was a really competitive skier, so high level. She was set to be on the US ski team. And then sort of just went quiet the fall of her senior year and was like, I don't want to be this person anymore. So she had been really pigeonholed as an athlete and really wanted to redefine herself. So a gap year for her, she went to France for a year, and for her it was a chance to really redefine herself and her personality. I had another student who had a really traumatizing high school experience. She had been diagnosed with depression. She was very much an artist and had not ever been given opportunity to really dive into her art. It was actually very sad. So she, you could tell that this was just like craving to get out. So a gap year for her was a chance to travel, explore the world, and have some self-directed time that was really rejuvenating and refreshing. I had another student who has actually taken 2 gap years. And he, after the first gap year, he applied to college and just sort of realized that he wasn't ready yet. And he still had some more exploring to do and was still a little bit antsy, and went back and did another gap year and is now in the process of finishing up his college applications. And so those 3 different types of students can give you just a glimpse into kind of what you might be dealing with.
Allison, if you had to pick one of these buckets, which one would you say that you fell into before you took your gap year?
Definitely the pragmatist, if I'm pronouncing it right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. I think just because of the town that I came from, given the lack of diversity, I was kind of itching to break outside of that and find my passions and be surrounded by individuals in a place that would offer me a sense of focus and who I was.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. So students can do a lot of different things on a gap year program. And I know Charlie's going to talk about this more later. What I love about Year On is that students actually are doing sort of all of these things within one gap year. I tend to prefer, as someone who's recommending these programs to students, I tend to prefer the programs that have an element of diversity, so that a student isn't just in one place the whole time or doing one activity for the whole year, where they can kind of mix it up a little bit to get as much out of that gap as possible. And so some of the things they might be doing, group programs, personal development, sort of life skills building, networking, volunteering, these internships or job shadows. And also just maybe paid work experience. Although I still think if it's paid work experience, it's ideal if it's part of a more comprehensive program. We do find that students who are part of a little bit of a structured program with some leeway in there tend to do much better. And also just for the sense of community. The student I told you about earlier who's done the 2 gap years, one of the things that he learned, he was very much the rebel in high school, wanted to break out, go it alone, be on his own. And what he found after a year and a half was that he really craved community. And he just needed a community of sort of like-minded, self-directed learners, but the community was really important to him. And I think that we don't want to lose sight of that in the gap year experience. So this is kind of what I was saying earlier. So it's something with a bit more of a structured program where you do have professionals and leaders who you look up to, who are sort of imparting some knowledge and wisdom to you, right? That it's not just the blind leading the blind, but where we've got a little bit of wisdom sort of being imparted. A lot of students are really craving that. They really do want to see people they can look up to and mentors they can have during this gap year. That's a great opportunity for that. But also to be among peers and like-minded independent learners. So some better breakdown of the benefits of a gap year program here. We got some data here on the next slide that breaks down the benefits by category. What I think is most telling and sort of most notable is the greatest benefits are personal. And I was kind of hinting at this earlier here in purple at the top. The gap year program first and foremost helps students develop as a person, helped with personal reflection, increased level of maturity. I remember a few years ago, I was talking to an admissions representative from Lafayette College in Pennsylvania, and he said he was conducting an interview. He was meeting a student for an admissions interview. And he walks into the restaurant, he's looking around for someone who looks like a young adult, a 19-year-old student, and he's looking around, doesn't see anyone. The only one in the restaurant is this young man sitting at the bar, but he's got a laptop and he's got a suit coat on. And he says, well, that can't be him. So he goes to the bar, grabs a drink, and is just sort of waiting. And sure enough, the student's like, are you my interviewer? And he says, I guess so. I was sorry to make assumptions, but I didn't think you were my student. And he was just struck by not only the maturity coming out of the student's mouth when they actually started the interview, but just the sort of aura, the maturity that kind of radiated off this kid. He clearly just felt like he had this sense of agency. He seemed very independent and adult-like, if there is such a thing. And I think that's sort of what you'll hear as you talk to more students who've done a gap year, and you talk to their parents, and you talk to the universities that love to accept students who've done a gap year. Is they just sort of notice this greater sense of maturity, this sense of direction, and this sense of sort of knowing.
So thanks for all of that, Alex. We have a question that came in from Kathy Connor, and I think that actually would be great for as we're talking about this, maybe some more procedural things. And we do have a little bit at the end about deferrals, but again, it's nice to just weave this in as they're coming to the top of your minds. But Kathy asks, what are the pros and cons about applying and then deferring versus taking a gap year and then applying during your gap year? What does one need when applying during their gap year, for example, your SAT or your ACT or your high school transcript? And what if one applies and then defers, takes a gap year, but then realizes they want to attend a completely different college?
Yeah, so I would say I mostly see the latter. So the last point she made here, where students will go through the application process, defer admission, begin a gap year, and in that gap year, at the beginning of that gap year, realize that they really want something quite different than they thought they wanted as a senior in high school. And so you will see these students who will often defer, you maintain their spot at university, but then actually give up that spot to then reapply at another university. As a counselor, I always recommend the route of applying to colleges your senior year of high school, just like normal. Also simultaneously applying to various gap year programs that are of interest, and then deferring. Some things to keep in mind, obviously, for those counselors attending here, you can sort of assume the challenges that are going to pop up when a student waits to apply to colleges after they've already graduated from high school. Securing those letters of recommendation that don't roll over into the Common App the following year. You've got to go back and get those letters of rec. The test scores are not an issue. Those you can just have sent again to the universities. But sort of like writing these essays again can sort of be a little bit cumbersome for a student. Maintaining that contact with your counselor and your teachers once you've graduated is a little bit of a challenge, but nothing impossible. So those are some things that pop up, so that's why, I would certainly recommend going the deferral route, but it's not the end of the world if a student chooses to then reapply once they're on their gap year.
Agreed. We tell students the same exact thing. Better to do it when again, you have that community. I think regardless of where you are as you're building that, it really helps keep you accountable. So I was just going to mention one more thing, Charlie. These are some more of the benefits that come, which you could probably assume. But I also, sort of wanted to mention that I think sometimes it's good. Students feel a lot of security sort of having the best of both worlds available to them before May 1st, which is decision day in the college world. And so letting students apply to colleges and gap year programs sort of at the same time, keep the ball in their court, so to speak, can also help to sort of calm anxieties. Agreed. So I want to take, I think that going off of one of the big things for year on and just using the idea of what a gap year could be as a starting point for us at year on, we're not a year off. We're very clear about that. At year on, we definitely are looking for students that want to invest in themselves. And I'll definitely let Allison talk about that in a little bit. One of our things, and Alex highlighted this very briefly, is when we were creating our program, making sure that there was diversity amongst our program elements. So, you get a lot of gap year programs and they might be, towards a very specific niche. So I mentioned skiing before, you'll have these programs that will bring students, they'll teach them how to ski and then they'll become ski instructors and they'll live on the mountain for a semester. You have programs that are travel programs that are meant to expose you to a different culture and, you're going from one place to another. There are some programs that are taking you to 9 different countries over your gap year and you're just kind of hopping from place to place. And when we looked at this, what we really started to ask ourselves was, how can we benefit the student the most? And how can we make sure that in this gap year, students are actually gaining skills that they can use moving forward? Because I think a lot of people, what they see is a gap year is a time for me to just restart and I need to take a break because I'm so super burnt out for college. And we recognize that and we want students to be able to take that break, but we also then just don't want them to walk into college and then just be burnt out again. We're hoping that we're giving them the tools that they actually can use to not repeat high school 4 years of stress. And that's how it kind of came up with the entire year for what Year On does. And we're very distinct in a way that we're broken into 3 different phases. So we start off with service learning. We have 5 international locations right now: Tanzania, Mexico, India, Indonesia, and Peru. And based on the different international locations, students get to pick the service learning project that they are going to participate in for the entire 10 weeks that they're abroad. And again, we want there to be this menu of options for them because we want them to have agency in being able to pick. It's really important that students are in the driver's seat. They haven't been in the driver's seat for the last many, many years because people have just been telling them where they need to be and at what time. So we want to start off this, you get to choose your own destination, because moving forward out of here, out of high school, no one's going to be telling you what to do anymore. You're going to have to make all of these decisions for yourself. So how can we start to build that confidence in them from day one? So we have these 5 international locations. We partner directly with these nonprofits and NGOs, and we're really immersing students in that community for those 10 weeks. And there's about 8 to 10 students per location, and then everyone comes to San Francisco. So between 40 and 50 students are coming to San Francisco. They're living in dorms in downtown. It's kind of like college light. We want everybody to understand what college is like before they go. So you're living in this community. They go to workshops every single day. And this is when the real value of our program starts to kick in person, and that's our coaching. And I'll get to that in a second. But based on what students are learning about themselves in these first two phases, then they're kind of building their own adventure. So we have some students that are doing an internship, some students are getting a job. We have students that are saying, hey, I'm going to road trip across the country. Some students that want to continue volunteering. And like Alex mentioned, there's some people that will take multiple gap years. Like some people might take our program and then they'll maybe do a different program, again, based on what they learn about themselves in those first two phases. I'm going to skip over a little bit of this stuff just to get to some of our program elements that we do, and really this slide on our curriculum. So a big thing for us is our coaching. I would say that that's the biggest differentiator that we have in the gap year world. We also have these three phases. Most people are just concentrated on travel or just concentrated on internships or just concentrated on some kind of skill, but we want to put all of that together. We want it to be a dynamic year for students. But for us, what it really comes down to is this coach that they work with. So you can imagine, for the counselors that are joining us today, it's like they're working with you, but for an entire year, every single week, both one-on-one and in a group. And I'll let Allison talk about her coaching experience in a bit to really give some color to that. But for us, on top of that, and with the coach, they're really starting to dig down deep. Like, who am I as a person and what do I want to do? How do I build a value set to make decisions in my life? So again, we're really starting to go back to who they are as a person and not all this extrinsic motivation, more starting to get to what intrinsic motivation means and how you can always rely on yourself to get to that next step. And that's why our mission is to give people confidence, clarity, and direction for their next steps. But another big thing is our workshops that we have students go through. And we've created these workshops that are supposed to be really a blend of the personal development, so going back to those values and what's important to me, to a lot of soft skill building. So we want students to really learn, like, what does self-advocacy mean? What does it mean to be rejected? What does it mean to, be an effective communicator? And then we go through a professional string of workshops to really help students just prepare for what life is going to be like, really what in college, and potentially if they're going to be looking for internships. So we teach them how to build a network, how to find a mentor, how to do an informational interview with that mentor, brush up their resume, their LinkedIn, how are you then doing a job interview. So a lot of skills that I think high schools expect college to do. Colleges are actually very upfront about, no, we don't teach those things. But we think that they're really important for students to succeed. And we think that it's going to really take a bite out of that 30% of students that are dropping out if they are grounded in this community that's able to help them move forward. So this is kind of our whole program, and we have these testimonials, and we'll be sending this presentation after, and you can for sure take a look at some of these. But I figured instead of doing that, we have a real life testimonial that's here with us. So Allison, could you just talk to us? Introduce yourself, where you're from, and talk to us a little bit about, you already told us that you would be the pragmatist. What was that like when you were kind of going through this idea of, I'm a senior in high school and everyone's applying to college and I've got to go to college? Like, was that a thought that you had, or was there something different going on? How did mom and dad react? Like, walk us through what it was like, maybe your senior year, first semester, or senior year, second semester, when this all started to percolate.
Yes, very stressful.
Good, yeah.
Yeah, so thank you, Charlie. I'm Allison. I am from the Chicago suburbs, specifically Deerfield. And when I was a senior in high school, I was completely overwhelmed by, I love how Alex addressed the idea that we as high schoolers don't have any context, because that's exactly where my head was at. And I felt like I needed to make a decision about where I should be going. And I knew that I liked to write, so I wanted to potentially major in journalism. So I was going to pick a school based on that. And that's all I knew. But I kind of felt like, as I mentioned before, I come from a town with a lack of diversity. It's a predominantly Jewish community. And there was a lot of like-mindedness in the sense that I felt forced into a shell and being sheltered, and didn't feel like I could voice my opinions or truly be the most authentic version of myself. And so I was kind of itching to get outside of that bubble and be able to have more context for who I was and what I wanted to pursue outside of knowing that I like to write. So I was probably going to major in journalism. And Gap Year did just that for me. And I especially loved the year-on program because of the different phases offered, because I was able in Bali, so I went to Bali for the Explore phase and taught English there. And during that phase, I discovered that I really have a passion for international travel, international relations. And so now at Mizzou, I am studying international journalism specifically. Whereas previously, I would have had no idea that that was something that I was interested in. I had never had that opportunity to break outside of my Deerfield bubble and go and see the world. And I built such strong relationships with the community in Bali. And I mean, that cultural immersion was just something outside of my comfort zone, but so incredibly worth it because of the relationships that I built, what I learned about diverse culture, and that was exactly what I was looking for. And so for me, that step and that leap to take a gap year was really scary in high school because it's so outside the norm, and I didn't know if it would be worth it, but it provided me exactly what I needed. And I think that whether you're the pragmatist or you're one of the other options that you named, I think that a gap year, like you said, offers context. And I think for someone who's itching to get context, it's so necessary, so helpful and beneficial in so many layers. And so moving on to San Francisco, the focus phase, I was able to develop workplace skills that I couldn't even conceptualize before this gap year. Between like Charlie, how you were talking about learning how to get rejected. We did a rejection therapy workshop where I would go out on the streets, and I found myself in the LinkedIn headquarters asking for a job. And yeah, obviously I was rejected because you don't just walk into a headquarters and ask for a job at a place like LinkedIn. But it was the idea of getting rejected and knowing that I was going to get rejected and just practicing that. And just being able to build those skills have completely shaped who I am, but in terms of like my confidence and being able to approach any given situation and any opportunity that presents itself and optimize it and give it 150% because of those skills that I've been able to build up. We did a networking workshop, an interviewing workshop, and I walked away with, like I said, that level of confidence to which I was able to find myself what I consider a good internship because it was exactly what I wanted to be doing. I was working for a startup company that promotes foreign goods, and I was able to blog for them and talk about those foreign goods and diverse cultures and interact with and work with a community of really diverse individuals. And I had the confidence to do that and the work ethic to do it because of the skills that I had built during the focus phase. And I think that the order of the phases it was so ideal for me personally because being in Bali, it completely strips you outside your comfort zone. You're exposed to a new culture, and that's scary, but like I said, completely worth it in the end because you become so whole. Being surrounded by such a community that welcomes you with open arms and just being able to get that exposure to a diverse environment. And so I think coming into San Francisco, I wasn't as nervous as I was heading into Bali because of that experience being able to get so far out of my comfort zone. So for one of the work sprints that we did in San Francisco, where, so a work sprint is basically you have 48 hours, right? It's 48 hours. 48 hours to create a project of your own and do something meaningful that you're passionate about. And so I opted to, knowing the value in stepping outside my comfort zone, do 10 things outside my comfort zone in San Francisco. And oh my gosh, so I did 10 different things, and I attended a networking workshop, and that was extremely intimidating, but I knew that I had the skills to do it. I had created my LinkedIn profile. I knew what I was passionate about. At that point, I knew that I wanted to be an international journalist. And so I attended this networking workshop head on and was able to build connections and connected with tons of people on LinkedIn who reached out to me that summer asking me to blog for them. And just there are so many levels to which I built the confidence to just approach everything head on. And like I said, give 150% of myself to everything that I do because of the skills that I built. And like I said, that's exactly what I needed and what I was looking for, that context of self, of the world, and who I wanted to be. So as I mentioned previously, I had an internship that I loved. And following that internship over the summer, I opted to attend the University of Missouri because they have a great journalism school. And heading there was such a smooth transition because of everything that I had under my belt. And I just went into college head on, optimizing every opportunity that I could. I actually started the Gap Year Advocacy Association at my school that was just recently recognized by the university, which I'm really excited about. So I've recently emailed about 30 high schools in Kansas City and St. Louis with a presentation proposal, and there are currently about 10 of us. It's 10 University of Missouri students who have taken a gap year, who all likewise feel like they have so much under their belt because of that time to just learn about themselves and about the world. And some of them did self-directed gap years, some of them did different programs, and we all have that underlying sense of the confidence that we built and that fulfillment in opting to take that year for ourselves and to have that freedom of, like you said, not being told what to do. And I think that that was absolutely necessary, and I'm I truly believe it's the best decision I ever made, because my college experience would be so different right now. I think I would feel pretty stagnant and there studying journalism and content, but I think the most authentic and best version of myself because of everything that I came in there with. And I'm involved in so many organizations. I'm in the Documentary Journalism Club, the Science, Health, and Environmental Journalism Club. I have 2 positions for the newspaper. I'm so much better at approaching people, so I've built so many connections with people. I sought out diverse groups of people rather than if I had not taken the gap year, I probably would have sought out people who I felt comfortable with. But now that I see the value in stepping outside my comfort zone, I just have such a network and such a range of possibilities to explore. And ultimately, I know I'm a little scattered, but ultimately, the point is taking a gap year was so necessary and such a good decision for myself because I am the best version of myself now.
I love it. And I love that you have started a group on campus to promote gap year. It's amazing. So we have a couple of questions that have come in. And so Allison, actually, I want you to answer this one because I think that you probably know a couple of students that fall into this bucket, but Alex, feel free to kind of jump in. The question is, if the student is not as motivated or focused, do you still recommend applying for college senior year if pursuing a gap year?
And absolutely.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
There's quite a few students that we get that, really are unmotivated or unfocused. And I think that Allison, from your standpoint, your peers, how do you look at this?
Yes. So despite being a motivated person myself, I had plenty of friends who were fellows in year on who came into it pretty unmotivated and just they were burnt out from school, or they were just tired and didn't want to go to college. Yeah. So for them, I think it completely altered their mindset. I think being in Bali or wherever they were on their explore phase, it clears your head and it can completely change you as a person. Just being in that environment, I think it might sound cheesy, but I think it makes you more passionate about life. And I think that a gap year sparks a fire in I think any individual, whether you're motivated or unmotivated. And despite me being motivated, I'm so much more motivated because of it. And I think that that's what it can do for anyone, especially having that freedom, like you said, to make your own decisions. Having that autonomy is so important, because I think part of where that lack of motivation stems from in people is being told what to do. Because that's what I was hearing in a lot of fellows. They were tired of people saying, you have to do this, you have to take these general education classes unrelated to your major, you're going to have to do high school all over again. That's what a lot of people felt like. But having that autonomy during your gap year, you realize that that's not what, that life can be different than always being told what to do. And I think that's where it sparks the motivation in people, because they realize that in life you can optimize so many opportunities, and you have the confidence to do that, building skills and understanding yourself.
Agreed.
I think the way that I was reading this question too is that, for some students, they don't even have the motivation to want to apply to college at all. They maybe already know they just want to do a gap year. And so the deferment thing doesn't resonate with them. And I think that's not the end of the world. I've definitely worked with those types of students who just are not going to be applying to college their senior year for a variety of reasons. Maybe motivation is one of the factors. And those students will do usually tremendously well in applying to colleges, and they'll be very successful applying to colleges after they graduate. And so I think that is not the end of the world. Although we recommend the deferment model, I think for a student like this, it could really be beneficial to wait.
For sure. And I like Alex, like you said before, it's not impossible. So I think we just need to make that really clear. It's not impossible for students to apply during their gap year. It's just more logistically challenging. You are gonna, if the student is not working with a counselor, like if you're a parent listening in right now, there's a lot that's going to, that you are probably going to have to support your student to make sure that they're getting all of the right things in at the appropriate times. And also, we always see this, oh, well, they didn't apply in time and now they're not going to get in. One of these nice, dirty little secrets of higher education that they never want you to know is, and for the counselors that know the NACAC listing that comes out, colleges will take students even into the summer. So we can be really real about that and understand that we can start reaching out to schools and saying, how do we get this student in at this time? But again, it's not going to be the normal process, which means that it's going to probably be a little bit more difficult or a little more bumpy. Hey, Alex, so how involved do you see parents in the process?
Yeah, I think you brought up a great point. I saw that question as well. So I can speak to my own gap year. When I did my gap year in Germany, my mother was absolutely my advocate, right? So she was going to the counselor's office because I was on a different time zone. And so she was helping me get all my materials that I needed when everything was still sort of paper-based. Now, obviously, everything is digital. It makes it a lot easier. Things like Zoom make it a lot easier. I've definitely been able to have meetings with students who are on a gap year to help them make sure they're getting things in on time and all of that. Letters of rec are all now digitally uploaded, especially with the Common App. That makes it easy. So I think it's easier now than it was 10 years ago. But I think the parents are that home-based liaison, right? For a student who is in a different time zone, especially during a gap year. I think the parent is an advocate for the student. But this does not mean, right? This does not mean you're writing your kids' essays. This does not mean you're filling out the application for them. I think you're just a liaison.
Agreed. And one of the things that we work with parents on a lot is, parents want to be very involved in the process. Similar to college, this is maybe the first time that your student is going to be leaving home or not living at home. And we have parents that are very hands-on. And to be honest, it's just as much education for the parent as it is for the student. We have to do a lot of work to explain, this is the point of the gap year. The point is for them to gain independence, to gain the confidence in themselves, to be able to take these steps on their own, which means that, you have to support them in doing that, but that also means that you're not in the driver's seat anymore. You got to now get into a passenger seat or maybe even the back seat. And that's just also an important thing to start to talk to parents about now, because it's going to help their student long term. And we see a lot of students that come to us and are like, my parents are smothering me. This is why I feel like I can't get a lot done. So we'd like to do a call out to that every once in a while and see like how we can support parents and making sure that we're making the transition smooth for them as well. So we're at 9:45. I know we said we were going to be, just around 45 minutes. If people have to hop, we totally understand. I'm going to try and get through some more of these questions. If you have any more questions, feel free to shoot them in. We're going to be sending this presentation out afterwards. And for anybody that does have to hop, I just wanted to let you know that because you are here today, if you do have a student that wants to take a gap year, and especially with year on, we are offering, just let them know that you actually went through this presentation, and they'll get $500 off of their tuition, which is pretty cool. So now that you have a better understanding, I'm going to take the next question here. So it's from Stacy Fenton, and she asked, how do gap years work for students with learning challenges? Is there support offered in gap year programs? I can speak a little bit to that. So the short answer is yes, there is support. It's just about being really clear about the gap year program that you are speaking with and just asking them. So there's a wide range of gap year programs. So, there's therapeutic programs to travel programs. We say that, we just do this case by case. We want to make sure that we can support the student. That is the most important piece for us. So safety and health is something that we take very seriously. It's like every single year we have 60 of our own children that we have to take care of. And we want to make sure that they are able to hit that baseline for themselves. And we're just very upfront if we cannot provide that support. But there are plenty of programs that, again, offer a wide range of services. And the smaller the program, probably they don't have as many resources as some of the larger programs. So I would just ask about that. But there are definitely different programs for everybody.
And I would just add, in addition to students with learning differences, I've worked with students with illnesses and physical disabilities, and for whatever reason, for a variety of reasons, they might need to do a domestic program or a gap year program that's a little bit closer to home to be able to see doctors regularly. And that's definitely been an issue for some students. And so I want to make it clear that gap year programs are not always abroad or international. There are plenty that are home-based. Mm-hmm. So that could be a good option for students who have that need.
For sure. Just a follow-up from Stacy, how do you defer? So this process is actually a lot simpler than people think. So once a student is accepted into a university, so a lot of students have already received their acceptance letters, and some of them will be getting them in just in the next month or so. There's either a formal application process that can happen that, for example, like at Tufts and at Duke, when you go into your portal, you just like press a button and it's like, I'm deferring, and that's it, you're done. But if that's not the case, usually what they require you to do is write a letter to your dean, the dean of admissions, and they will, case by case, usually grant or not grant the deferral. Something to note that, I think that for counselors and for parents, really make sure that every year you have to reapply for federal financial aid. So that is something that, regardless of whether or not you take a gap year, you're going to have to do. But institutional aid is actually usually a one-time grant. So just make sure that that can be carried over. And if not, what are the steps to be able to potentially reapply for that institutional aid? A lot of people don't ask this question, and they're just under the assumption that, well, because I got a $15,000 scholarship right now, I'm going to get $15,000 next year, and that's not the case. So that would be one thing to just really keep in mind after you write that email, to just be clear about that. And the other thing is that most schools will say, we are allowing you to defer and take a gap year. However, you are not allowed to enroll in another institution. And that might sound like, oh, I would not do that. But what that really means is you are not allowed to take any credits that could now qualify you to being enrolled in another institution. So if you're wanting to use 529 plans with gap year programs, they're most likely giving you credit. So kind of just make sure that, and if you are going with gap year program, like we're just very upfront with this, ask those questions. Like constantly ask, like, what do I not know? And just put it on the gap year program to tell you, because we all know these different things, but we don't want anything to catch you by surprise. This is supposed to make the student life cycle easier, not harder, by participating in a gap year. From Karen Hawks, does Year On or other gap programs work with high school seniors who graduate in December and are looking for a spring through summer gap program? Also scholarships, question mark. Do you want to take that, Alex?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I definitely had students who graduated early, and so they'll pursue gap programs that are semester long. So many of the gap year programs now also offer summer programs and semester programs. And so you can check out the American Gap Association for some of those. I actually don't know this about Huron. Do you let students come in sort of at different times of the year?
So we do have a semester program that would satisfy, that student would be able to enroll in. Our one stipulation though, which probably would not allow the student to enroll with us, is that they need to be 18 years old. So if the student has already turned 18, they're good to go. They can definitely join us. But if they are not 18 yet, then unfortunately we cannot have them quite yet, just insurance.
Yeah, I had a student who did, she graduated early in the spring and did a short-term gap program with Go Eco, and then came back and did a longer gap program. Actually, I'm sorry, she did a summer program and then started college in the fall. So that was sort of like a truncated gap experience. And then speaking of scholarships and financial aid, just really quickly, you brought this up, Charlie. If it's a credit-bearing gap year program, just be careful if the university you're requesting deferment from stipulates that you can't be in a credit-bearing program, because then you could lose that deferment. And then also, even though you can, the benefit to a credit-bearing program is that you can use financial aid 529 plans for that. So that can help if it is a credit-bearing program. And then also, American Gap Association offers scholarships for students who are pursuing gap programs.
And many GAP programs have scholarships for students. Just to kind of touch on cost for a second. So our program costs $24,000 for the year. That includes all of their housing abroad, all of their housing in San Francisco, most of their meals abroad, lunch every day in San Francisco, all of their coaching and all of their programming. And I would say we're kind of middle of the line in terms of cost for programs. You have everything that maybe is just slightly cheaper than ours, like maybe in the low 20s range, all the way up to like $55,000 for a year. And so most schools will have scholarship programs. And for example, last year we ran just around 30 students and we gave just around $125,000 out in scholarship. One thing to note about this is it is on a rolling basis for most places. So, we have different application windows, and that is how we're awarding scholarship. It's just as people come in, it's first come, first serve. We try to save a little bit for the end for a lot of the people who are like, oh man, I really need this. But it's difficult for planning purposes. We have another just question about deferral. And it's why do you recommend students apply and defer if they will likely have a transformative year and apply to a different college anyway? And I'll say quickly from our end, we think that if the whole purpose of taking a gap year is to really focus on yourself, what we find is that if people are spending like a good portion of those months just trying to get all the logistics done for their application process, it takes away from the experience. They're then focused on something that has really not a lot to do with them, just to try and get it to where they want, just to be able to apply. So if they have an idea of what they want to do, we do recommend that they apply to a couple of schools, or if they have applied to a school, we just realize that this creates a lot of abundance in their brain. So they're allowed to then say, you know what, I can take this time, devote time to myself. And then if I want to, I can, but it's not as much of a stress that I must. And therefore, they, then wind up usually just it's cost benefit for them, sacrificing a lot of time to work on themselves. So I would say that that's why we still recommend that they do this before they go. That doesn't mean that that they can't then reapply somewhere else. And Kathy Connor asked, your costs don't include flights, and we do not include flights. That's because our students are flying for their first phase all throughout, all from all over the world to their international locations. Any other questions? Alex, Allison, did we miss anything today that we feel like people should maybe know? And for a lot of the deferral guide, everyone, we'll send that out in an email afterwards. We have a full guide that'll give you kind of an overview of how to defer. I know there was a lot of questions. I think that they're really great. And instead of my kind of, all over the place, it's all very, very nice and compact for you.
Yeah, I think this was great. That deferral guide, I think, will answer any additional questions. I think there were a lot of questions about deferment. So that's great. This is so top of mind for people, and I think just giving them their permission to ask these questions and to consider it is really like liberating. I was at a school in the city this week, and I brought up gap year, and it was like Pandora's box. All of a sudden the talk just went totally off. And so people are really excited about this. So it's good to know that you're part of a community, I think.
Yeah, a huge community. I mean, right now, so I'm in Portland right now. We're headquartered in San Francisco. May be surprising to some people, but there are now gap year fairs across the United States, very similar to college fairs. And so there's 41 throughout the United States this year. I have so far myself been to 13 of them. I did an entire East Coast tour, and then I went to Chicago for 2 fairs, and now I went to Seattle 2 nights ago and Portland last night. And there's around between 100, and at New Trier there was like 550 people that showed up for these fairs. I mean, it's gigantic. I mean, it is a huge community. More and more students. Like, these statistics are not just stats that have no bearing. Like, we're seeing this in real life. Parents are really interested in something like this, and students are starting to say, how can I make them the best of my next 4 years? And then for the students that aren't actually planning on going to college, this is also a really great next step for them, because they're gaining a lot of skills that they're going to need to be successful post high school. So if there is, if any of you are in the California or Colorado area, there are a whole bunch of gap year fairs in the next couple of weeks. Everyone else, unfortunately, those gap year fairs have already passed, but California is up next, and then Denver. So, but yeah, with that, I just want to say thank you to everybody for showing up today. If you have any questions, feel free to email us. You can get us at hello@yearon.com. I'm CEO@yearon.com if you have a message for me personally. Alex Ellison, thank you so much for joining today.